Skylum have announced that they're running a Drone Week promotion, and I have just recently picked up a new drone mini. So it's a great time for us to explore drone photo editing inside Luminar Neo and see if it is actually a good fit for editing drone photos. Let's get into it. While the rest of the world seems to be enjoying a lovely summertime, unfortunately in New Zealand it's been really grotty and gross recently. So when I saw the sun shining just the other day, I had to get out with my drone, capture some images. And it's this drone photo here I'd like to edit in this tutorial, because while it does have a lot of potential, but it also has a lot of issues in the file that we're going to need to problem solve along the way. So there's a really good opportunity for some learning as we go. So you can see in the catalog view here that I actually have 3 photos all taken at the same time, just with differing exposures. I've got a medium exposure, a darker exposure, and a brighter one. And I've set that up in my drone to take that HDR series so that I can then utilize the best of all that lovely exposure data in Luminar Neo. So all I need to do is drag them into the HDR merge tool, hit merge, and that's going to bring all of that information together for me. And there we go, we're transported to the HDR merge folder, and I'm just going to open this up. And using the HDR merge tool like that is a really nice shortcut to get access to all the full dynamic range available to us. The only area where we still have an issue is with the blown out sun, but I will be dealing to that. I've got a little plan to take care of that anyway. So the first thing I noticed about the overall look of the photo is it's a little bit dark. So I'm just going to boost that exposure up. I'm going to grab the smart contrast slider and have a little play with that. We don't always want to go into the positive territory with this. Sometimes bringing away the contrast just actually adds a bit more detail into the photo. But for this one, I think I'm just going to boost a little bit of smart contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights down so that we're controlling that information through the sky. And I'm going to lift the shadows as well, just so that we're getting a bit of information in the trees down here. So currently, here's our before and here's our after. We can see from the histogram here that we don't have a pure white point. We can also turn on the warnings that let us know whether we've clipped our highlights or dropped the shadows too far into black. That's always a good thing just to put on when you're doing this initial edit. You can see already that we are getting some black pixels there. So a black point is already pretty good, but we don't have a true white point. Even lifting this all the way up, I'm still not getting a pure white, but I'm not too worried about that because my intention at the moment is to actually do a sky replacement on this. I'm just going to check my sharpness in my file. I'm going to turn off the warnings that let me know where I've clipped to pure black. And now I'm zoomed in, I'm going to add a little bit of sharpness. Not too much, probably about 50%, but I find that the sharpness from my drone is pretty good anyway. So let's have a little toggle of the before and after. Okay, that's looking pretty good. But I am just going to visit the shadow area of this photo just so that I can assess the noise reduction and need for it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of luminosity noise reduction. Nothing wrong with doing that. Before and after. Okay, I've just realized one thing I haven't looked at is the color temperature. I'm thinking that I'd prefer to see a much warmer image. And one thing it's worth doing when you start just looking at your file is actually drop the temperature, boost it up, and just get a feel for what you like the look of. I actually prefer to go for a more authentic color balance during this early stage of the editing because we can always add more creative color grading later, but it's good just to start from a nice authentic color palette. I may add just a little bit of saturation and vibrance though, just to help those colors along. Okay, in terms of an initial develop, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's check out before and after, a nice clean edit. But you've probably already noticed one of those issues that I alluded to earlier, and that is we've got a bit of lens refraction going on. Because we shot straight into the sun and our drone doesn't have a lens hood or anything like that, not that would help us shooting straight into the sun, but we can't minimize that refraction. So I'm going to have to do that with post-production, but easy enough to do. And I'm still a big fan of the clone tool. In spite of all the clever AI we have for removing things, I love just using the clone tool, because that allows us just to sample from one area by clicking down, and then we can just paint straight over any area we want to get rid of. So it's like borrowing from one area and painting it over another. And because I think I'm going to do a sky swap and potentially even add a bit more sun flare afterwards, I'm not going to worry too much about this bit of banding through here. But if you wanted to get rid of that, all you need to do is just sample from a very similar tonal range, similar color, and then just paint over the top and just get rid of it like that. So that's one way you can get rid of anomalies like that. So here's our before and here's our after. Okay, so as I'm assessing the photo, I'm looking for areas that I want to improve, enhance, areas that are distracting that I want to minimize. I'm just assessing all of that all the time. And one of the things that actually drew me to this particular image was the stream that's running through the center of the frame. Now, in my mind, I saw a really beautiful S weaving its way off into the distance, but in reality, when the photo was taken, I probably wasn't quite high enough to actually see all of that river. And so that actual S, the beauty of that curvature, keeps getting broken. So what can I do about that? That's what I'm always asking myself when I'm doing editing is, what can I do to rectify that problem? And so the easiest way I think to solve this problem would be to use the dodge and burn tool, which is going to allow me to brighten and darken certain areas of the photo. And I can brighten up and fake the curvature of the river as if it's still meandering its way through, and potentially enhance the shadows and darken those down. So let's give that a go. I'm going to open up the dodge and burn tool right here, and we have the option for lighten and darken. So I'm going to start off by lightening the areas I want to lighten, and I'm just using my left bracket key just to make the brush just a little bit smaller. And usually when I'm doing this kind of editing, I'll probably use a pen, but I like to do my videos just with a mouse to try and show you guys who don't have access to a pen that it's still possible to do a very nice edit using a mouse. So all I'm doing is going around the edge of the river here, and even the areas where the river would be visible if the drone was just a little higher, and I'm just sort of introducing a bit more light into those areas, just trying to define that S shape. And it's always a good idea just to have a little toggle of before and after and see how you're going. And if you have an area that you don't really like the look of, like I don't really like what I've done just over here on the right hand side, we can just erase that with the erase option. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to the darken mode, and I'm just going to accentuate potential shadow areas so that again we're sort of helping to define this S shape that's going on. And if at any point you make a mistake, you can just press Ctrl Z on your keyboard. That's undo. All right, so let's toggle that tool off and on just to see what's going on there. But while we're at it, we might as well enhance some other areas as well. So one of the key things that I really liked about this photo was in the bottom left-hand side, how we've got these trees here being illuminated by the sunlight. So I'm just going to go around the edge of the brightest side of those trees and just add just a little bit of a light kicker. So just in lighten mode on the dodge and burn tool, I'm just going around those illuminated edges. Let's just have a little toggle of before and after, and you can see it's just lifted those trees out now as well. I might hit these ones as well. And if you start to get a little bit of a halo going on like I did here, we've always got access to that erase tool, so we can just take that away. Okay, let's press the \/ key to see our original before and our after. That's one way to do it, or we could select the slider to go for the before and after that way as well. Okay, we're making good progress. What's next? Well, I would like to actually add a little more saturation and interest into the scene here. And there's many different ways that we could tackle that. However, I'd like to jump into the super contrast, and we'll have a little go with that because that's going to allow us to actually boost up that highlights contrast slider, and that's actually darkening down the highlights. But a beneficial consequence of doing that is we're actually adding in some saturation. So if we zoom into the land here and we look at the before and after, you can see that there is less contrast. However, now we actually have more color there. And that's what I'm actually after in this particular photo. Now, as I'm making changes here, we're affecting the photo globally, as the tools always will do, unless we apply a mask. So I'm not concerned that perhaps the sky isn't looking quite the way I want it to, or the sun is going a little bit yellow and weird. I'm not too worried about that sort of stuff. All I'm looking at are the areas that are of concern to me, because I can always mask it in afterwards. So now I'm going to grab the midtones and I'm going to push that up. Now, one good thing is to push this all the way to 100 and then grab the balance, and you can actually see the difference between going to a darker look or a brighter look, and actually see what you like the look of. So for this instance, what I'd like to do is actually bring those midtones a bit brighter, but not to that extent. So now I'm just going to reduce that overall effect. So how we're looking before and after, Okay, not bad. And then we can do the same with the shadows as well. I'm going to boost the shadow contrast. It's getting to look a little bit like nasty HDR from back in the day, but not a problem. We're not brightening those shadows up. What I actually want to do in this instance is just darken them down so we're getting more contrast. After all, that's the point of this particular tool, super contrast. So here's our before, here's our after, but I don't want that through the whole photo. Like I say, I want it on the landmass here to give us that color, and perhaps on the trees on the left-hand side, it's just helping to accentuate those as well. So let's grab our mask, let's come into the brush, and I'm just going to paint this in. I like to work with a strength somewhere around 50% often, and usually quite a big brush so that we can get things done relatively quickly. So I'm just painting over those trees and the midground. So currently we have 50% of that effect there. Let's go again, a little bit stronger, and let's even put some over the river as well to help draw attention there. Before and after. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, one of the great things I've found with using Luminar Neo for editing my drone photos is that because it's so good at editing landscape photos, well, drone photos are effectively just landscape photos, right? So all of that tool set just carries on over to the drone photos. And that's what I'm going to do here is borrow from that landscape toolset and do the sky swap. So Sky AI, I'm going to see if we can't introduce a brand new sky. Now, one of the things I really want to do here is actually correct the composition. So with Sky AI, how am I going to correct the composition? Well, if we look at the photo, most of the interesting elements actually occur on the left-hand side of the frame or in the center. There's not much going on in this right 2/3 of the photo. Now, I don't want to just like kind of recrop this. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is actually balance it out. So currently, the elements that I think are important are the big bright sun, the peak of this mountain here. This is a bit more interesting than this mound over this side. So we've got 2 elements on the left. Now the meandering river, that's in the center of the frame. So that's kind of a neutral pivot point between the 2 sides. But the other feature are the trees in the bottom left corner. So effectively, we've got a 3-0 score in favor of the left-hand side of the image being more compositionally strong than the right-hand side. So what I'm hoping to do is use a sky that might have the sun on the other side, and we can always flip that so that we can kind of balance things out. So we can have the weight of the trees, the visual weight in the bottom left-hand corner, and the weight of the sun, the visual weight of the bright sun on the right-hand side. And that will give us a much better sense of balance in the image. So next thing is finding a sky that works. So let's jump out of the crop tool. Don't want to do anything with that. And we're just going to go into the landscapes. I'll close all of these tabs down just so it's a nice cleaner workflow to look at. So in the landscapes tab just here, we're going to go to Sky AI and let's see if we can't find something more suitable. So we have the sunset selection, or we have all skies. These are the skies that ship with Luminar Neo. Personally, I like to work with my own sky library, and if you have a drone, I'd recommend that you start collecting a sky library for yourself that you can call on so that your work is uniquely yours. However, I'm going to use what ships with Luminar Neo, but if you want to get access to a really good sky library, I'll link to the one that I used to use before I had built my own. Okay, let's come to the sunset section so that we know that we're going to have a sun somewhere in there, and we can just start clicking on these and seeing what Luminar Neo does as it loads them in. Now, just with regards to sky libraries, like this ships with Luminar Neo, this drives me insane. Why would you want a helicopter in the sky? Literally, you have to clone that out every time you want to use that sky. Oh, ridiculous. Anyway, how about this one? Okay, so this has the sun in pretty much exactly the same position that the sun was when we shot the scene. And usually my advice in terms of believably introducing a new sky is match the position of the sun to where it would have been in the actual photo. However, for this particular image, I think we can actually get away with flipping it. There's not enough in it to make us think there's something wrong with this, I don't think. I think we can get away with it. One of the things I particularly like about introducing this sky is that we're harmonizing our color palette. Aside from the mountain here, which I think we can deal to separately, the actual yellow hues of the palette are starting to harmonize nicely. Okay, I don't think there's too much I actually want to do in terms of changing the sliders. I'm just going to have a little play with the Relight AI and just see what that's doing for us. Yeah, well, maybe we'll push a little bit of that in. and it'd be worth exploring whether we want to warm up the sky or cool it down any. But I actually think how we introduced it in its normal state is absolutely fine. We can now play with brightness or darkening it down. Yeah, maybe we'll darken it just a little bit. Okay, we'll go with that. So one of the key things with introducing a new sky or compositing anything into your scene is that sense of believability. And currently, I think that we're okay in terms of direction of light. It's close enough to get away with. However, in terms of the coloration in the mountains, there's a bit of a mismatch going on there. The foreground of the scene, the yellows there, I think that looks all right, but it's the mountains that are standing out as a different color at the moment. So how are we going to fix that? Let's take a look. So what I'm going to want to do is actually select the mountains and then deal to that coloration that's kind of a bluey green at the moment. So how am I going to make that selection? Well, as you may know, Luminar actually has a select mountains AI option, but that I don't think it's going to work for us, but we might as well give it a try. So if I jump into the develop section so that we can control the temperature, that's going to allow me to actually start changing the color in the whole image. So let's just get rid of some of that green, some of the blue by introducing more yellow, and potentially let's even desaturate that just a little bit as well. Okay, here's our before, here's our after, but we just want that over the mountains. So I'm going to open up the masking, and we might as well give Mask AI an opportunity to show us what it can do. I'm going to select mountains. And while that might be good enough if you're uploading something to social media, for me, this isn't going to cut it. Look, let's go back to the adjustments, and you're going to see that fringing around the top of the mountain. So it's not super accurate. It's really good if you just want to have a quick Kickstarter to get you close. But like I say, it's not good enough for me. So what I'm going to do is come back to that masking section, come out of that, and I'm just going to go to the show mask option. And now I'm just going to clear it. So it's gone, completely gone. This time we're going to actually work with a luminosity mask. Why do I want a luminosity mask? How's that going to help? Well, I know that those mountains are going to be darker than the sky. So what I want to do is grab the highlights and start bringing this slider down. So that's going to remove the sky from that mask. And I want to find the point where we only have mountains and not the sky. Now, unfortunately, due to the brighter area on the top of the mountain here, we're not going to be able to get a perfect selection of just the mountain and not the sky. So what I'm going to do is kind of split the difference. And we can do that by grabbing this little arrow just here and then just starting to just find a little bit of a sweet spot. And now if I jump out of that, you might be thinking, well, that's not actually giving you the selection you want. But I'm not worried about that selection. What I'm worried about is the fidelity of the edge. Look how much more precise that edge is now compared to what we had before. And from there, it's going to be really easy or much quicker for me to come in with a big fat brush with a strength set at 100. And now I can just sort of fill in that area there and then come to the erase mode. And I'm going to get rid of all my softness so it's really clear and easy to see where I've erased the mask. And I find when you start painting very close to the edge of something like I'm doing here, it's a good idea just to do it in stages, because if you take your mouse away and you've made a mistake, you can easily press Ctrl-Z to undo just a small part at a time. Now for this bit, I am actually just going to soften my brush and just create a bit more of a softer transition between that area there. Okay, and if I zoom out, we can see that we still have all the bottom selected, so I just need to remove all of that. But that's nice and easy to do with a 100% brush. And now you can see we have a pretty much perfect mask just over the mountains. So here's our before, very blue, out of place with the rest of the image. And here's our after, we've just toned it back a bit. So no matter how good the mask is between the sky and the foreground, often there will be a little bit of a visual discrepancy between the two. So if there's any tips that we can employ to actually help fuse those two elements together, I think that's a good thing. And one such tip is to actually introduce, if you have a sun in your scene, a sun flare in there, because that's going to go over the sky and the foreground and help to merge those two in the viewer's eye together. So let's see if we can't achieve a result like that now. So I'm going to go into the landscape section where we find the sun rays filter, and I'm just going to grab the amount slider and bring that up for now. So what we want to do is actually place the sun center, of course, over the center of the sun. Wow, Anthony, you don't say. Right, now we want to get it looking how we want. So often with the overall look slider, I normally tend to go towards the right-hand side of where it's sat naturally, but in this instance, I don't mind that. And it's just literally a case of playing around with these sliders to get the look you want. I find that if you push the penetration slider too high when you're dealing with things like mountains, you can see that we get this bleeding effect over the edge and it doesn't look particularly convincing. So I like to go relatively high with that, but I don't want to see any of that bleaching effect. Something like that's pretty good. Now in this instance, I'm not too worried about the rays of the sun so much as the actual flare from the sun itself. So I'm going to push the glow radius and the glow amount quite high for now. And the actual rays from the sun, I'm going to bring those down and see how that's looking. Okay, let's sit that somewhere around 40. That's good. Currently our sun and sun rays are very white. So by adding some warmth to the sun and warmth to the sun rays, we can actually get rid of that cool look from the sun and introduce that nice warmth. So here's our before. Here's our after, before and after. Now, of course, we don't need to be introducing it with anywhere near that level of intensity, but I do like the effect. So we'll go relatively strong with it, and I may push those sun rays just a little bit further into the scene as well. One thing I think is quite important with the sun rays filter is that you don't necessarily apply it through the whole image, because I really love all of these beams coming down through the valley here, but I'm not a big fan of them going up through the sky. And so what we can do is use the brush in paint mode, and let's bring the strength down to about half. And as soon as we click, once we get rid of the effect, everywhere we start painting, that's where we're going to see the sun rays effect taking hold. So what I like to do with this is actually kind of paint it through the image on the direction that I want the viewer to look. So we talked about the composition before, and I'm trying to create balance between this top right element being the sun and the bottom left being the trees. And that's why I'm drawing the sun rays through that part of the scene to help guide our viewer's eye from top right to bottom left, from top right to bottom left. And you will also notice as I flick this on and off how the mountains are being affected by the sun as well. And so that's helping to integrate the sky and the mountains into the same image. And it can be a bit of a dance between applying it and removing it. So if you feel like you've gone too hard anywhere in the image with that, you can just use the erase to remove the effect. Okay, looking at the photo, I need to address composition one more time. We've introduced much better balance in the photo with the sun and the trees. However, there's something very dangerous going on here with this photo, and that is the potential for our viewer to fall out of the frame. It's really dangerous, right? It's not really dangerous, but you don't want it to happen. We want people's eyes to dance around our photo and look at all of the things in the frame that we want them to look at, but not their eye to exit the frame. And what can happen if you don't have some sort of bounding area in your photo, some kind of visual frame, the viewer's eye can leave the frame. And that's exactly what's going on here. If we start from the bottom of the frame here, where the stream starts to lead our viewer's eye in, and we work clockwise around, you can see that we're actually held in on the bottom left-hand side by the trees. The viewer can't just disappear out of this part of the frame. The same too here with this mountainous shape on the left-hand side. That helps to just lead our viewer's eye back into the center of the frame. If we look at the sky, we have a darker cloud running along the top edge of the frame. And again, that stops our viewer from disappearing off out of the top of the frame. But when we come around to the right-hand side, particularly the mid and bottom part of our photo, you will notice that we have very bright land going on here, and there's nothing to stop our viewer from going off and out of the frame. So what can we do about that? Well, a really great tool that has been around for years that I really love is the Vignette tool. And that is one solution. So let's have a quick look at that. Vignette, bring the amount slider down, and just by darkening of the edge compared to the brightness in the center of the frame helps to hold our viewer's attention in the middle of the photo. And that's great. But the problem with the Vignette tool is, unlike most tools in Luminar Neo, we don't have a mask. So over on the left-hand side here, I feel like that's getting far too dark in the photo. But without access to a mask, there's nothing I can really do about that. So we need to create our own custom vignette that we can control with a mask. Let me show you how we do that. So I'm going to jump back to Tools, and this time I'm going to open up the Develop tool, and we're just going to darken down the exposure. So we're basically creating a darkening over the whole image. So we want it just around the edges. How do we do that? Well, we come into Masking, and we want a radial gradient. So I'm just going to click and draw my gradient out from the center. And now, do we have what we want? Let's have a look. I'm going to come out of that, and no, we don't. We've actually got the opposite of what we want. So we're darkening the center, not the edges. So no problem. We just show the mask and we're going to invert it so we get the opposite effect. So let's have a look now. Before and after, before and after. But you might be thinking, well, Anthony, that's exactly the same as the effect we had with the vignette before. And you would be right. However, we can now revisit the mask, and if we feel like it's too much in this top left-hand corner and by the trees, what we can do is come to our brush and just erase it from those areas. So I'm just going to paint it away from here, and maybe even in the sky up here as well, because it's predominantly down in this area that I wanted to darken down. Maybe even take a little bit more away from this side. And now let's have a look. Here's our before and our after. Before and after. There's still just a little bit over the trees, which I certainly don't want. I really want to make sure that those guys are nicely lit up. Okay, let's have a quick look at our before and our after. Before and after. We've certainly come a long way so far, but I want to keep playing. We've got the Twilight Enhancer that I want to give a go to with this image. I don't know if it's going to work or not. We might have already achieved enough of a evening twilight look already, but why not have a play? That's what Luminar Neo is great for. It's just having a play around and seeing what you like. Okay, so let's close down the Essentials tab there. And this time I'm going to jump into Landscape once more and Twilight Enhancer. Okay, to see any effect, we need to grab the amount and start introducing the effect. So that's too much and it's not really what I'm after, but we have a couple of options. Well, 5 in fact. We have golden. That might be quite good to work with. This is blush, that's interesting. Emerald, not so much. Mauve was where we started, and we also have the option for blue as well. I'm going to go with golden for now. It's not the look I'm after right now, but I'm wondering if we have a little play around with this, whether we can't actually get this looking more like what I'm after. The shade slider is good for actually darkening the foreground down and making it look more like Twilight. However, I'm thinking I want to actually brighten my foreground up a bit. Let's bring the saturation down. I feel like the sky is just getting a little bit too yellow on us, so I'm just going to bring the temperature back down a little bit. And I don't want to go too magenta with it because that's not really in the existing color palette in the foreground. So let's have a little look. Before and after. Before and after. That's okay. Yeah, we'll leave a little bit of that in. And adding that Twilight Enhancer didn't really do what I was hoping it would do. I don't know what I was hoping for, to be honest. I was just playing around. And that is one of the things that I really love with Luminar Neo for landscapes is you can just have creative playtime. And it doesn't matter. You're not going to hurt your image. If you don't like an effect, just throw it in the bin. But if you do like the look of Luminar Neo and you don't have it yet, then by all means check out that Drone Week special. I'll put a link to it in the description. I think it's 80% off the standalone license. And on top of that, Skylum have kindly given me a discount code to share with you, my viewers. So that's in Porky Pig. It's in the comment section down below. No, the description, that's where it is. Okay, let's wrap this up with a bit of creative finishing. I think we are getting a little oversaturated, so I'm just going to pull the saturation down a little bit. That's going to help to neutralize the palette and just give the photo an overall calmer look and feel. Now, the greens that we have going on here, I almost feel like they're a bit of a clash with the yellow. So I'm going to come into the HSL, which is the hue, saturation, and luminance, and I'm actually going to change the hue, the color of the yellows and the greens, and I'm actually going to try and push them just a little bit more towards yellow. So you can see if I grab the green slider and move that around, we're flip-flopping between a kind of more cyan green and pushing it towards yellow. And if I go towards the yellow, it's just helping to, again, harmonize that palette more into the yellows and oranges. So let's have a look at the before and after. Before and after. Yep, okay, I like that. We'll come back to the tools. Let's see what else we can do. Let's go into the creative section. Haven't visited this yet. One of the things I like to work with is dramatic. As I grab the amount slider and push that to 100, you'll see that it certainly adds a lot of drama. But in its default setting, I'm not a huge fan of it, but with a little bit of tweaking, we can get it to something that I prefer a lot more. So one of the things I'm not a big fan of is that it desaturates our photo completely. So if we push the saturation, we can keep all of the color of our original photo. I don't know, maybe a little bit less. The brightness slider as well. Usually it introduces an additional amount of brightness, but I'm going to set that down to 0. Let's have a look before and after. So now it's pretty much just adding contrast into our photo. Local contrast is a lot more gritty and grungy, whereas if we pull it down to 0, it's more of an overall contrast addition. So let's kind of go about 20%. And now we've got the look that we like. We can just grab the amount slider and just tease it in to a point where we feel happy. Something like that, 68, before and after, before and after. And there is quite a lot of detail in this photo, so it can be quite visually distracting seeing all of that at once. So a nice softening effect might not go amiss. So I'm going to add one of my favorite filters, which is mystical. Oh yeah, you knew I was going there. So if I push that to 100, you can see what that does, right? So it just softens everything up and gives it a really nice glow. But I don't like to use it that aggressively. The default of around 30 is quite nice. We don't have to darken the shadows. We can lift them or we can pull those down if we want. I don't know, somewhere around there. And just like the dramatic filter, we can get a more hard and crunchy localized look, or we can make it very diffuse and soft. And the whole point of adding this mystical filter is to soften things up. So I'm going to push that smoothness pretty high in this instance. I might want to use that colorization to actually push this to a warmer look as well. And I can add a bit more warmth as well, just really go hard in on this warmer look for the photo. So before and after, before and after. Okay. And if we feel like we've overtoned the orange effect, what we can do is actually start introducing a different color into the shadows. So I'm going to pump the saturation really high so I can actually see what I'm doing here and select a color that I find is quite complementary. So we'll go for a nice deep blue. We can also still keep a nice orange look in those highlights, something like that. I'm going to push the amount all the way to 100 because that allows me to clearly see with the balance slider what I like, whether I go more towards the highlights and the oranges or more towards the shadows and those cool tones. Something around there is pretty good. And now we're happy with that look. What we do is just bring down the saturation and the amount slider to a point we're happy with before and after. So originally we have orange and yellow pretty much everywhere, even creeping into the shadows. Whereas with that little bit of color toning, we're just bringing back a complementary color into the shadows. Okay, quick caveat before we do our before and after, which is my favorite part. When I'm recording these videos, I don't have the opportunity to do what I recommend that you do, which is step away from your photo before you finalize everything. Take a break, let your eyes just adjust, because when you're staring at a photo, it's easy to get caught up and not see mistakes and over processing. That's an opportunity I don't have when I'm doing these videos. But having said that, let's have a look at our before and after, see where we started and where we got to. So I'm going to press the / key, and that was our HDR merged file, unprocessed. And here is our edited version. It's a really big change. So we're being authentic to the original landscape. That is the shape of the land, of the earth as it was photographed, but we've played around with the color, with the lighting, with the contrast. And for me, I'm much happier with that photo. That's for me, it's all about having playtime and creating what I envisage and what I like. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that, guys, because I certainly enjoyed having a play around with that photo and pushing that edit pretty far. Now, that's one of the things I really love about Luminar Neo is just how creative you can get with a slider-based program. So if you're interested in Luminar Neo, don't forget that they have that promo running at the moment, 80% off. then do me a favor before you disappear from the video. Just press pause and let me know in the comments what you've actually learned from this video, if anything at all. I do hope so. If you enjoy photo editing, you might enjoy that video that's popping up right there now. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, click the AT right there, and I'll see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye for now.